I want to start today with a ghost story. Or actually, let's call it a ghost continent.
A ghost continent. I like that.
I was looking at the map you sent over for today's deep dive, and I have to admit, I was a little confused at first.
Yeah, it's not the standard map we're used to seeing.
Not at all. I mean, at first glance, it looks like Australia, but it's bloated. It's swollen. You've got Papua New Guinea kind of fused to the top, and Tasmania is stuck right onto the bottom. It looks like a fantasy map from, a Tolkien novel or something.
It does look like fantasy, but that's the thing. It's history. You're looking at Sahul.
Sahul.
That's the name geologists and archaeologists use for that combined landmass. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania all as one.
So it's a continent that technically doesn't exist anymore.
Not in that form, no.
Yeah.
But for the vast, vast majority of human history in that part of the world, that is the map. That was the reality.
Okay, so help me picture this. If I'm understanding this correctly, if I were standing on a beach in, say, northern Australia 40,000 years ago, and I look north, I wouldn't see the ocean.
You wouldn't see the ocean at all. You'd be looking at a massive, sprawling savanna, a huge plain.
So you could just walk.
You could physically walk from the highlands of New Guinea all the way down through what is now Queensland, cross the Bay Strait without getting your feet wet, and just keep walking right into the wilderness of Tasmania.
That is just mind-bending, because today, that's a whole bunch of distinct islands, different countries even.
Exactly. It creates a completely different mental image of the world. We are so used to thinking of Australia as this huge, isolated island continent.
The land down under.
Right. But Sahul was a colossus. And the reason we're diving into this today isn't just about, plate tectonics or sea levels.
No.
We have a massive stack of sources here: archaeological reports, rock art surveys, geological data, and they all paint a picture of the people who walked that ghost continent.
And lived there for a staggering amount of time.
At least 65,000 years.
I feel like we say numbers like 65,000 years and it just washes over you. But let's just pause on that for a second. That's deep time.
It's almost unfathomable. To give you a benchmark, 65,000 years ago is tens of thousands of years before humans even set foot in the Americas.
Wow.
It's tens of thousands of years before the really famous cave paintings at Lascaux or Chauvet in Europe. While Europe was largely the domain of Neanderthals, you had fully modern humans establishing a civilization right across Sahul.
And that's really the core of what I want to get at today. The sources you've pulled together, they're not just about stone tools. I mean, stone tools are cool, don't get me wrong.
They are cool.
But I'm really interested in the visions of these people.
Their cognitive world, their inner life.
Exactly. How did they see themselves? How did they see this giant, strange continent they were living on? Because usually when we talk about the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, we just talk about survival.
Right. Calories, warmth, not getting eaten.
Yeah, the basics. But the stuff we're looking at today suggests they were doing a lot more than just surviving.
That's the big takeaway, really. The evidence from Sahul just destroys that old idea of ancient humans as these primitive brutes just running around trying to spear dinner. From the very moment they arrive, we see complex symbolic behavior. We see art. We see what we call iconography. They weren't just living in the world, they were recording it. They were imagining it.
But, and this is a big but here, right? We have a major problem with the evidence.
We do. We are trying to reconstruct a puzzle where, maybe half the pieces are missing.
Because of the ocean.
Because of the ocean, yeah. We have to remember that we are looking through a keyhole. When the Ice Age ended, and we'll get into the details of this later, the sea levels rose dramatically.
So the map of Sahul literally shrank.
It shrank back to the map of Australia we know today. And in that process, we lost about 2.12 million square kilometers of land.
Wait, how much is that in terms of percentage?
That is roughly 22% of the entire continent. Gone.
That's a huge chunk of real estate to just disappear.
And it's not just the size of the land, it's the quality of it.
Yeah.
That 22% was the coast. It was the prime real estate. The river mouths, the estuaries, the lagoons.
Right.
In any civilization, ancient or modern, that's where the people are. That's where the cultural centers are. That's where the downtown is.
So you're saying the New York City or London of the Australian Pleistocene
is completely underwater. It's gone. What we are finding today, the archaeology we are going to discuss, is mostly from the hinterlands, the high country, the deserts,
the suburbs.
We are trying to understand a massive civilization based on what they left in the remote suburbs.
Which I guess makes the stuff we have found even more incredible if this is just the backcountry evidence.
It really does. It implies that the cultural center was likely even richer and more complex than what we can see.
Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning, the first footfall. You said 65,000 years ago.
Roughly, yeah. The dating at sites like Majid Baby and Arnhem Land is pretty robust now. It puts people firmly on the continent by at least 65,000 years ago.
No, I've always had this kind of cartoon image in my head of early human migration, just people walking, walking out of Africa, walking across Asia, just following the herds.
And slow, steady spread.
But you can't walk to Australia.
No, that is the critical point. Even at the height of the Ice Age, when sea levels were at their absolute lowest and Sahul was at its biggest, there was never a land bridge.
Never.
Never. Asia and Sahul have always been separated by a deep ocean trench known as the Wallace Line.
So to get there,
you have to swim or you have to float. And we're talking about crossing the Wallace Archipelago. This isn't just a river crossing.
No.
This involves multiple open ocean stretches of up to 80 or 90 kilometers.
Out of sight of land.
Completely out of sight of land.
I want to just dwell on that for a second. We're talking 65,000 years ago. This can't be a guy accidentally floating on a log and just getting lucky.
The genetics tell us it wasn't an accident. To establish a viable, permanent population that survives for 65 millennia, you need numbers.
Right, a founding population.
You need families. You need men and women. You need genetic diversity. It wasn't one boat that got lost.
So this was the planned expedition. Multiple expeditions, maybe.
It had to be. Think about the cognitive leap required for that. You're standing on the coast of, say, Timor or Indonesia. You can't see the other side.
Nothing, just ocean.
Maybe you see smoke from distant bushfires on the horizon, or you notice birds migrating south every year, but you don't know what's there.
And yet you go anyway.
And yet you get a group of people together, you build a raft or a boat, which itself implies sophisticated engineering, and you launch yourselves into the void.
That is effectively the space program of the Pleistocene.
It really is. While humans in Europe were land-bound, the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians were the world's first open ocean mariners. It applies language, planning, leadership, and a level of bravery that is just hard to comprehend.
So they land. They're in a new world. Strange animals, strange plants. And the old assumption, the colonial one, was always that they were primitive, technologically simple.
That was the assumption for a very long time, yes. But the archaeology just flips that completely on its head. One of the most striking discoveries is the ground edge axe.
Okay, this was in the notes, and I had to double-check the dates because it didn't seem right to me.
It surprises everyone. For a long time, the standard narrative was that polished stone axes, where the blade is ground smooth against another rock to create a really sharp, durable edge, were an invention of the Neolithic.
The agricultural revolution.
In Europe or Asia, yeah. Much, much later.
We're talking, what, like 10,000 years ago?
Roughly. But in Australia, specifically in Arnhem Land, we find these perfect ground edge axes dating back 35,000 years. And potentially much older.
So tens of thousands of years before Europe.
Before anyone else on the planet. It completely debunks this idea of a technological hierarchy. These people arrived in Sahul, saw these incredibly tough hardwood forests trees, much harder than what you find in Europe, and they innovated.
They invented the right tool for the job.
They invented the technology they needed to master their new environment. They were the Silicon Valley of lithic technology at the time.
But they weren't just making axes to chop wood. They were making things that, well, things that don't seem to have a practical function. And this is where we get into the vision part of this deep dive. You used a term in the outline, exograms.
Exogram, yeah. It's a concept from cognitive archaeology.
Break that down for me.
Okay, think of it like this. If I tell you a story and you remember it, that memory is stored inside your brain. That's an enogram. It's internal.
Right.
But if you write that story down, or you paint a picture of it on a rock, or you carve a symbol for it on a piece of wood, you are storing that information outside your brain. That is an exogram.
It's an external hard drive.
Or a Post-it note. Or a library. It's the moment humans stopped relying solely on their own biological memory and started using the physical world to store and transmit information.
And we see this happening really early in Sahul.
Very early. At the Medjugorje site, in those deepest layers, we're talking 45,000 to 60,000 years ago, archaeologists found ochre.
Okay, but finding red dirt isn't that special, is it?
No, but they didn't just find red dirt. They found ochre crayons.
When you say crayon, I'm picturing like a Crayola.
In function, It's not that far off. These are pieces of hematite, which is a high-grade iron ore pigment that have been faceted and striated.
What does that mean, faceted?
It means someone was holding them and deliberately rubbing them against a grinding stone to shape them, probably to make a fine powder. The striations are the marks from being rubbed against a surface. They're processing pigment.
To make paint.
To make paint, yes.
So 60,000 years ago, someone is sitting in a rock shelter preparing the color red.
And making a conscious choice to do so. You don't eat ochre. It doesn't help you hunt an animal. It is a purely symbolic act.
And we don't know what they were painting.
We don't. The rock art from that long ago has likely faded or eroded away. Maybe they were painting their bodies for a ceremony. Maybe they were painting designs on animal skins or bark or wood things that just don't survive. But the crayons are the smoking gun. They prove that people were projecting their ideas out into the world.
And they were decorating themselves too. You mentioned the bling factor.
The bling of the Pleistocene. This is another area where the evidence is surprisingly delicate and human. At a site called Mandu Creek in Western Australia, dating back about 32,000 years, they found 22 conus shells.
The little sea snails.
Yes, but these had been modified. Each one was carefully perforated, drilled.
Drilled so you could string them together.
Exactly. They were beads for a necklace or a bracelet.
Wow.
And at another site, Devil's Lair in the southwest, they found bone beads and even a pendant made of marl. Now, you have to ask yourself, why do you make a bead?
To look cool. To show off.
Basically, yeah. A bead is a social tool. It's a signal. It tells other people who you are. It might say, I am a great hunter, or I'm an initiate of this ceremony, or I have trading connections with the people on the coast.
It implies an audience.
Absolutely. You don't wear jewelry if you're living a solitary animalistic existence. You wear it because you are part of a complex society where status and identity and communication actually matter.
It makes them feel so much more modern. I mean, the impulse to wear a necklace 30,000 years ago is the exact same impulse as someone wearing a Rolex or a wedding ring today.
It's the exact same hardware in the human brain, the need to signal who we are to each other.
Okay, so we've got the tools, we've got the beads, we've got the pigment. Now let's talk about the art itself, the stuff that did survive on the walls. Because Australia has one of the richest rock art traditions in the world.
The longest continuing art tradition in the world. Nothing else comes close.
And the oldest stuff is, well, it's weird. It's not what I expected. I kind of expected stick figures hunting a kangaroo. But the oldest art is completely abstract.
This is what we call the characterized tradition, or sometimes the panoramide style. If you go to the Uluru district in South Australia, or look at the oldest known sites in Tasmania, you don't see pictures in the way we think of them. You see marks.
What kind of marks?
Circles, lots of circles, sometimes concentric circles like a target, spirals, mazes of curvilinear lines, and cupules.
Cupules. What's a cupule?
Imagine a large rock surface, a boulder, that has been systematically hammered with a stone tool to create a cup-shaped depression, a little dimple.
Just one.
Sometimes just one, sometimes hundreds, even thousands of them covering a whole boulder, so it looks like the surface of a golf ball.
That sounds incredibly labor-intensive. You're just hammering away at solid rock.
It requires immense effort and time. And the fact that we find this very specific style, these circles and tracks and cupules, in Tasmania is actually the key to dating it.
How so?
Remember, Tasmania got cut off from the mainland by the rising seas about 12,000 years ago.
Right. It became an island.
So if this very distinct art style exists in Tasmania and on the mainland, it must have been part of a shared culture before the sea rose. It must be older than 12,000 years. It anchors the whole characterized tradition firmly in the Pleistocene.
But there's another type of mark making that I found even more, I don't know, evocative, the finger flutings.
Ah, yes. This is something that really chills the spine when you see it in person.
Describe the setting for us, because this isn't just painting on a cliff face in the bright sunlight.
No, this is deep cave art. We're talking about places like Cunalda Cave on the Nullarbor Plain. To get to the art, you have to go hundreds of meters underground.
So total darkness.
Complete, absolute darkness. You would have needed torches, maybe bundles of burning sticks to see anything at all.
And the walls are soft.
In certain chambers, the walls are covered in this substance called moon milk. It's a limestone paste, basically calcium carbonate, that stays soft and white because of the high humidity in the caves.
Yeah.
It has the consistency of like a stiff cottage cheese or a thick plaster.
And in the art is literally just fingers.
It's the art of touch. You're looking at marks made 20,000, maybe 30,000 years ago by people who walked into the pitch black, held up a flickering torch, and dragged their fingers through this soft white paste on the wall.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just 3 or 4 parallel lines tracing the span of a human hand. Other times it's these complex overlapping lattices that look like a woven fabric.
It's so intimate. I mean, you can practically see the width of the fingers. You can tell if it was a child or an adult.
You can. And the context adds another layer of meaning. Cunolda Cave wasn't just a ceremonial site. It was a flint mine.
Oh, so they were working down there.
They were going down there to dig out silica nodules to make stone tools. It was an industrial site. But in the midst of that work, they took a moment to stop and to leave a mark.
And some of these marks are way up high on the walls, right? In places you can't reach today.
That's right. It suggests they were likely standing on piles of rubble or rock that have since collapsed or shifted over the millennia. Gives you a sense of the changing landscape of the cave itself. But just imagine that sensory experience. The deep silence of the cave, the smell of the damp earth, the flickering, uncertain light of a torch, and the physical feeling of dragging your hand through the earth. It's a very visceral form of vision.
But we have to be really careful interpreting this stuff, right? I mean, when you're looking at circles and lines, it's like looking at clouds. You can see whatever you want to see.
That is the great danger of rock art research. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia. The human brain is hardwired to recognize patterns, especially faces and figures, even where there are none.
There's a famous story you mentioned about a crocodile that really drives this home.
The Panoramide crocodile. Yes, this is a classic cautionary tale in archaeology.
Yeah.
Back in the early 20th century, researchers were documenting these ancient engravings at a place called Panoramide North in South Australia.
Okay.
And one researcher, Charles Mountford, looked at this complex oval-shaped design with some lines coming off it and said, that is clearly the head of a crocodile.
Which would be a massive discovery, right? Because crocodiles haven't lived in South Australia for millions of years.
Exactly. It would imply that the art was unbelievably ancient, dating back to a much warmer tropical epoch. But he was completely wrong.
How do we know he was wrong?
Because ethnography exists. Later researchers actually went back and spoke to the local Adyamathanna elders, the Aboriginal people who held the knowledge for those symbols.
And it wasn't a crocodile.
It wasn't a crocodile. They said it was a eureka.
Which is?
A magical object, a sort of charm, used in sorcery. It's a spiritual tool, not a picture of an animal. The Western researcher saw a picture. The indigenous artist had drawn a concept.
It's like if a future archaeologist dug up a no smoking sign, you know, the cigarette in a circle with a line through it, and thought we worshiped the god of bagels or something.
That's a perfect analogy. We cannot simply impose our own visual dictionary on their symbols. We have to accept the mystery sometimes and listen when the knowledge is still there.
Okay, so we have this long, long period of abstract art, the Cherokee tradition, but then something changes. We move to the Kimberley region in northwest Australia, and it's like the lights turn on, we get high-definition pictures.
And Kimberley is arguably one of the greatest open-air art galleries on Earth. And the sequence of art styles there is like a history book layered on stone.
And the most famous chapter in that book has to be the Gwion figures. I think they used to be called Bradshaws.
Yes, they were named after the pastoralist Joseph Bradshaw, who discovered them for the Western world in the 1890s, though obviously Aboriginal people always knew they were there. The preferred term now from the local people is Gwion.
Describe them for us, because they look nothing like the circles and cupels we were just talking about.
They are exquisite. That is really the only word for them. They are these small, incredibly slender, elegant human figures. They're painted in a deep mulberry-colored ochre that is chemically bonded with the rock over time, so they almost look like they're part of the stone itself.
Like silhouettes.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But the detail, it's like a fashion show from the Pleistocene.
That's what jumped out at me immediately. They aren't just stick figures, they aren't naked.
Far from it. They are decked out. They have these elaborate, complex headdresses, tassels hanging from their arms and waists, sashes, armbands, little bags.
Tassels.
So many tassels. It suggests a society that was incredibly focused on ceremony, on presentation, on ritual attire. The figures are often shown in motion, floating or dancing. They're just so elegant.
And there's this massive debate about how old they are, and it involves wasps.
This is one of my favorite bits of archaeological science. Dating rock art is notoriously hard because the ochre pigment is just rust iron oxide. You can't carbon-14 to eat rust.
Right.
But in the Kimberley, you have the mud dauber wasp.
A wasp that builds its nest out of mud.
Exactly. And sometimes a wasp builds its nest right on top of a painting. Or even better, an artist paints over an old fossilized wasp nest.
So it's a time sandwich. The art is the filling.
It's a perfect little time sandwich. And the mud in the nest contains tiny sand grains. And we can date those sand grains using a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL.
What does that do?
It basically tells us when those sand grains were last exposed to sunlight. In other words, when the wasp gathered the mud to build the nest.
That is brilliant. It's like CSI, Pleistocene.
It is, and one major study dated a wasp nest that was built over a Guian figure and got a date of around 17,000 years old.
17,000. So that would put these elegant, tasseled figures right in the middle of the last glacial maximum, the peak of the Ice Age.
The harshest, coldest, driest time. They were having a fashion show in the middle of the Ice Age.
That's amazing.
Other studies suggest they might be a bit younger, maybe closer to 12,000 years. But either way, they represent a distinct, incredibly sophisticated culture that flourished thousands and thousands of years ago.
And the art isn't just about fashion, it's a catalog of their technology, too.
It is. It's like looking at a series of old photographs and seeing how phones changed, from those giant bricks to the iPhones we have today.
How so?
In the early Guian paintings, the figures are often holding barbed spears, but they're just holding them by hand.
Gripping the shaft.
Right. But then, later in the sequence, the style changes a bit. We get to what's called the static polychrome period, and suddenly the figures are holding something new, a hook-shaped tool, the woomera.
The spear thrower.
The spear thrower. It's a lever. It acts as an extension of your arm and allows you to throw a spear much harder, faster, and further. It's a major upgrade in hunting technology.
A game changer.
A total game changer. And we can literally see the moment it was introduced or invented, depicted on the walls. It's a tech rollout recorded in pigment.
That is so cool. It connects the art, the vision, directly to their survival strategy.
Exactly.
All right, let's travel east now. We leave the elegant dancers of the Kimberley and go to Arnhem Land on the other side of the country. And the vibe changes completely. If the Guianguian are the ballet dancers of the Pleistocene,
then the figures in Arnhem Land are the action heroes.
Yes, the dynamic figures. The name says it all.
They are frantic with energy.
They are. They're running, leaping, fighting. They're in the middle of throwing spears. And the style is so distinct. They have these elaborate headdresses and these bustles, like skirts at the back.
That's right. And this is where things start to get a little supernatural. We begin to see therianthropes.
Part human, part animal figures.
Yes. You might see a human body with the head of a kangaroo or the wings of a flying fox.
So is this mythology? Are we looking at their gods or spirits?
Almost certainly. When contemporary Aboriginal people in Arnhem Land look at these ancient paintings, which are thousands and thousands of years old, they often identify them as Mimi spirits.
And who are the Mimi?
In the oral tradition, the Mimi are these thin, trickster-like spirit beings who live in the cracks of the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
They're so thin that a strong wind could break their necks.
Okay.
And crucially, they're the ones who taught the first humans how to hunt, how to cook kangaroo, and importantly, how to paint on the rocks.
So the art is depicting the very beings who taught them how to make the art.
It suggests a continuity of belief that is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We might be looking at the origin story of the Mimi, or at least a version of it that has persisted for 10,000 years or more.
There's one specific visual meme, as you called it in the notes, that really stuck with me. The back-to-back figures.
This is a fascinating and very specific detail. In the dynamic style, and also in the slightly later Maliwawa style, you keep seeing this specific composition. Two figures. Sometimes they're humans, sometimes they're animals like echidnas standing perfectly back to back.
So they're looking away from each other.
Yes. It's a very deliberate, formal pose, and it keeps showing up over and over again. It's in the rock art from 9,000 years ago. It's in arc paintings from 100 years ago. It's still a known composition.
Wait, so you're saying the same visual symbol, that specific pose, survived for 9,000 years?
9,000 years. Think about that. The entire Roman Empire lasted, what, 1,000 years, give or take?
Mm-hmm.
Ancient Egypt lasted maybe 3,000. This single visual motif, two figures standing back to back, has outlasted almost every empire in human history.
What does it mean?
We can speculate. It likely represents some concept of duality or a partnership, a social bond, maybe specific mythological beings. But the meaning almost matters less than the fact of its survival.
Right.
It proves that this culture wasn't just surviving day to day in the wilderness. It was maintaining a strict, coherent intellectual and artistic tradition over millennia.
It's an incredibly resilient idea.
Incredibly. And the dynamic figures also act as a kind of weather report from the past. Well, look at what they are hunting in those old paintings. They're spearing emus, Kangaroos, echidnas, these are all inland, dry country animals.
Okay.
But if you go to Arnhem Land today, it's a massive coastal wetland. It's full of crocodiles and barramundi and water birds. The art eventually changes to reflect that the famous X-ray art style from a few thousand years ago is full of fish and turtles.
Ah, I see.
But the dynamic figures capture a time before that, a time when the sea level was much lower and the coastline was hundreds of kilometers further out. Arnhem Land was a dry inland savanna. They were painting their reality, and their reality was a world without the wetlands.
Which brings us to the biggest animals of all, the ones that aren't there anymore, the megafauna.
The giants, yes.
I think everyone secretly wants this to be true. Humans arrived 65,000 years ago. The megafauna, the giant wombats like Diprotodon, the marsupial lion Thylacoleo, they go extinct around 46,000 years ago.
Give or take.
That's a nearly 20,000-year overlap.
That's a long time. They were neighbors for a very, very long time.
So where are the paintings? I want to see a portrait of a Diprotodon. I want to know what a 3-ton wombat looked like to a human eye.
You and every archaeologist in Australia, this is the great frustration of Australian archaeology. We have thousands and thousands of rock art sites, and the number of unambiguous, definite paintings of extinct megafauna is remarkably low.
Is it 0?
It's very close to 0 for the big herbivores like Diprotodon or the giant kangaroos. There have been claims, of course. Baso thought he found a Diprotodon track. Mountford thought he found that crocodile.
Right.
But most of those turn out to be pareidolia, just wishful thinking. See what we want to see in a collection of abstract lines.
Well, why wouldn't they paint them? It seems so strange. They painted emus. They painted wallabies. Why not the biggest, most impressive animal in the landscape?
That is the million-dollar question. Maybe they did, but they painted them on perishable surfaces like bark or wood that have simply rotted away. Maybe the rock art from that specific 45 to 65,000-year-old period has all eroded. Or maybe, and this is a cultural theory, they simply didn't have a tradition of painting them in a figurative way. Maybe a set of concentric circles was a Diprotodon in their visual language. We just don't know.
But there is one exception, though. One ghost from that world that they did paint. The thylacine.
The Tasmanian tiger. Now, this is a special case. The thylacine is extinct on the mainland now. It disappeared about 3,000 years ago, probably because the dingo arrived and outcompeted it.
But before that, it was all over the continent.
It was, and we have beautiful, undeniable paintings of thylacines in the rock art. You can see the characteristic stripes on the back, you can see the stiff, thick tail, you can see the dog-like head. It's unmistakable.
So when you see a thylacine painting in Arnhem Land or the Kimberley, you know it's old.
It acts as a perfect chronological marker. It screams pre-dingo. It anchors that piece of art in a specific ecological window of time before 3,000 years ago. It's a ghost of the past landscape captured in ochre.
And briefly, because I know listeners will ask, did we kill the megafauna? Was it a human-led blitzkrieg?
The blitzkrieg hypothesis, the idea that humans arrived, burned the place down, and speared everything to death in a few hundred years, is largely dead now.
Because of that long overlap period.
Exactly. 20,000 years is not a blitzkrieg, it's a slow coexistence. The current thinking is that it was a double punch. The climate was already getting much drier, the forests were shrinking, and the big water-dependent megafauna were already under a lot of stress.
And then humans arrive.
We're a new, intelligent predator. We hunt the juveniles. We use fire to change the vegetation. We add just enough pressure to an already stressed system to tip it over the edge. It wasn't a murder, it was an ecological squeeze.
And speaking of squeezes, we need to talk about the biggest squeeze of all. The event that really ended the world, or at least the world of Sahul, the Great Inundation.
This is the context that hangs over everything we've discussed. The end of the Ice Age.
The ice melts. The water comes back.
And it comes back with a vengeance. Starting about 18,000 years ago, the global temperature starts to rise. The massive ice sheets in the northern hemisphere begin to collapse, and all that water flows into the ocean.
How fast did the sea level rise? Because usually when you say geological speed, you mean boringly slow.
Not this time. In some parts of Australia, specifically on the very flat, broad continental shelves like the Gulf of Carpentaria, the coastline would have moved inland at a rate of 23 meters per year.
Wait, 23 meters a year?
23 meters. Every single year. Think about that. That's the length of a tennis court every year. A football field every 4 or 5 years.
That is terrifying. I mean, if you build your camp near the beach, by the time your kid is 10 years old, the beach is gone. Your whole territory is underwater.
It would have been a constant generational trauma. The country was literally being eaten by the sea. It's no surprise that stories of the flood are common in Aboriginal oral traditions all around the coast. They almost certainly date back to this event.
And as the land shrank, the people were pushed back.
They were forced into what archaeologists call refugia. As the arid interior expanded and the coast flooded, people were packed into the areas that were still livable. The well-watered gorges, the river valleys, the uplands.
That must have been chaotic. More people on less land.
It likely increased social tension. But paradoxically, that tension might have fueled art production. When you are suddenly packed in with new neighbors, you need to define who you are. You need to say, this is my land, this is my totem, these are my stories. The explosion of regional rock art styles might be a direct response to the stress of a shrinking world.
We've been talking about all this land that was lost, the drowned coast. For a long time, we just had to assume that all that history was gone forever, washed away. But you have a note here about Cape Bruguiere.
This is some of the most exciting new research. This is underwater archaeology.
So actual diving to find sites.
Yes. In Northwest Australia, a team of archaeologists went diving on the continental shelf in areas that would have been dry land during the Ice Age. And down there, at depths of roughly 2.4 meters, they found stone tools.
Just sitting on the seabed?
Hundreds of them, sitting right where they were, dropped thousands of years ago, before the water rose. They found another site at a place called Flying Foam Passage, even deeper, down 14 meters deep right, near a submerged freshwater spring.
So the Atlantis of Sahul is real. The artifacts are still there.
It proves that the history didn't just vanish, it's preserved, waiting for us. It validates this idea that we are missing a huge, huge piece of the puzzle.
I want to zoom in on one last place before we wrap up. We've been talking about the whole continent, but I want to look at one specific spot that feels so intensely human, Lake Mungo.
Mungo is a very special place. It's part of the Willandra Lake system in New South Wales. If you go there today, it's a moonscape. It's dry, it's dusty, it's covered in saltbush. It looks dead.
But 40,000 years ago.
It was an Eden. It was a massive system of interconnected freshwater lakes, teeming with golden perch, mussels, yabbies. The shores would have been covered in birds. It was a paradise.
And this is where they found the remains of Mungo Lady and Mungo Man.
The oldest human remains ever found in Australia. Mungo Lady was found in 1968. She lived about 40,000 to 42,000 years ago.
And it's not just that they found bones, it's how she was found that's so significant.
She was cremated.
Cremated, 40,000 years ago.
Fully cremated. The forensic analysis shows that after she died, her body was ritually burned. Then the remaining bones were smashed. Then the fragments were carefully gathered up and buried in a small pit.
That's an incredibly complex ritual.
It's the oldest known cremation in the entire world. Think about what that implies. It implies a complex belief system about death and the spirit. It implies a ritual to release that spirit from the body. It implies that the living cared so deeply about the dead that they performed this elaborate, multi-stage ceremony. This wasn't just disposing of body. This was a funeral.
And a Mungo Man.
He was found a few years later, not far away. He was a bit younger. He wasn't cremated. He was buried lying on his side with his hands clasped over his groin, and his entire body had been sprinkled with red ochre.
The ochre again, that symbolic color.
But here's the kicker. Geochemical analysis of that ochre showed that it wasn't from the Lake Mungo area. The nearest source of that specific type of ochre was hundreds of kilometers away.
So they imported it just for his funeral?
Someone walked hundreds of kilometers to get the sacred red dust to sprinkle on this man's grave. That speaks to established trade networks for sure, but it also speaks to deep emotional bonds and a profound spiritual life. These were people who loved, who grieved, and who honored their kin in a very sophisticated way.
It just shatters that primitive stereotype completely. They were living good lives, weren't they?
The archaeology of Mungo paints a picture of abundance. The middens, which are the ancient trash heaps, are full of fish bones, emu eggshells, the bones of small marsupials. They weren't struggling, they were thriving. They had a rich spiritual life and a full belly.
There is one last detail about Mungo that I found absolutely bizarre. The magnetic excursion. This sounds like something out of science fiction.
It's a beautiful, beautiful accident of geology. It turns out that about 30,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field got wobbly. It's called the Lake Mungo geomagnetic excursion. The North and South poles didn't fully flip, but the magnetic field drifted significantly and weakened for a while.
And we know this because of their campfires.
Exactly. Imagine the Earth is a giant magnet. When you light a fire on clay ground, you heat that clay up. The heat allows the tiny iron particles in the clay to move freely, As the fire dies and the clay cools back down, those iron particles lock into place, aligning themselves with wherever north happens to be at that exact moment.
So the hearth is a frozen compass.
It's a perfect snapshot of the planet's magnetic field from 30,000 years ago, recorded by a family cooking their dinner. It's this incredible connection between the intimate human act of making a fire and the planetary physics of the magnetic poles.
That is just poetic.
It really is.
So we've covered so much ground here. We've gone from the first maritime arrival to the drowning of the entire coast. We've seen the high fashion of the Glean figures and the frantic action of the dynamic figures. If you had to summarize the vision of these people, the people of Sahul, what would it be?
I think the vision is one of incredible adaptability and profound continuity. For centuries, the outside world looked at Aboriginal Australia as stagnant, a place where time stood still, a fossil culture. But the evidence we have shows the exact opposite.
It shows a constantly changing, dynamic world.
These were the world's first explorers, the first open ocean mariners. They were brilliant inventors, the ground edge axe, the woomera. They were masterful artists creating distinct, powerful styles that evolved over millennia. And above all, they were survivors. They faced arguably the most catastrophic climate change event in recent human history, the loss of a fifth of their own continent, and they adapted.
They held on to their culture while the world literally washed away around them.
And they kept that culture alive. The ochre, the rituals, the stories, the art, the continuity of culture from the Pleistocene to the present day in Australia is unmatched anywhere else on Earth.
It really changes how you look at the map. It's not just an island, it's a survivor.
It absolutely is.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. You called it the provocative thought in the outline.
Let's go back to that pea hole we talked about at the start.
The drowned land.
We established that 22% of Sahul is now underwater. And we established that that drowned coastline was likely the richest, most populated part of the continent. It was the New York and the Paris of the Pleistocene.
Right.
So consider this. The rock art that we have today, the magnificent guion, the haunting dynamic figures, all of it, these are the survivors. These are the paintings that were made in the rough, rocky hinterlands, the backcountry, the suburbs.
I see where you're going with this.
If the backcountry art is this spectacular, if the suburbs produced the guion figures, what masterpieces were painted on the cliffs of the drowned coastlines?
Wow.
What cathedrals of art, what massive galleries, what incredible depictions of their world are sitting right now under 100 meters of water, being scoured by sand and dissolved by the ocean, never to be seen by human eyes again.
So we are just looking at the fringe.
We are marveling at the edges of their achievement. The core of their artistic expression, their grandest visions, might be gone forever.
That is a haunting thought to end on. The lost galleries of Sahul.
It keeps us humble. We have to remember we only know a fraction of the story.
Well, I'm definitely going to look at the ocean differently next time I'm at the beach.
As you should.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today.
It was a pleasure.
We'll catch you in the next one.